8 of DMD100, Intro to Digital Media Design. All right, we are in our 8th week. We are at the halfway point. There's 16 weeks in the semester. We are at week 8, so we are halfway through. So what are we doing this week? Take a look at the week 8 overview. All right, so this week we are taking a look at our next tenet of visual literacy. So recently we took a look at pictograms and icons, and so the natural progression from pictograms and icons is to logos and branding marks. Now, I purposely put this in here because, based on the areas of study that are common to students that take this class, the idea of branding and identity systems and logos and advertising and marketing, it's pretty common with a variety of majors. And so pictograms and icons, of course, are the simplification of a concept or an image for better communication purposes, and it dates all the way back to ancient man. We talked about this last time. Well, logos and branding marks, of course, are a much more modern incarnation of that, but what I find fascinating about them is how pictograms and icons can tell very small stories, right? Like, this is the men's room, or this is the exit you need to get off of when you're driving. It's a very small story. But branding marks and logos, even though they visually can be as simple as a pictogram or an icon, tell a much larger story, right? If you look at the Nike swoosh, it's a very simple graphic. It's not complicated visually, but it tells a very big story. Whatever your interaction with Nike as a company is, whatever you know about them, maybe you've owned some sneakers, maybe you've owned some clothing, maybe you're aware of athletes, famous athletes who wear Nike products, and maybe that's part of your story about them. It can tell a much bigger story. And so that's an interesting transition from pictograms and icons to logos and branding marks. So we'll talk a little bit about logo development, concept iterations, et cetera, et cetera. Now, for your consumables this week, there is a couple of things. There is this handout here about ideation techniques. These are a collection of ways in which you can brainstorm ideas and you can come up with solutions to things. We are going to be working on our title sequence soon. You guys have already sort of started the process of your title sequence in terms of choosing your classic movie or TV show and reimagining it, and now you have started collecting some content for it. Well, soon we're going to be building your title sequence. And so it has to be based on a concept and something creative. And so this handout will walk you through some ideation techniques to sort of help you with your brainstorming, right? It's different for everybody. Everybody has different ways of doing things, but this will be helpful. The other consumable this week is this video, this branding and identity video here. This will sort of give you a quick overview about what branding and identity is from a design point of view. It's very short. It's only about 6 minutes long, but if you're unsure what branding and identity work is, it goes beyond just a logo. This video will give you an overview of that. So make sure that you consume both of those. That is sort of your textbook reading for the week. Okay, due at the end of this week is step 3 of the semester project. Now, step 3, let's take a look at exactly what that is, just so we're clear. Now, this, of course, plays directly off of step 2, which you completed last time around. So step 3. So step 2 was the collection of your research, where you collected a whole bunch of photos or graphics or other visuals as well as sounds that would serve as both inspiration for your upcoming title sequence, but also as content for your upcoming title sequence. Now in step 3, you're going to present that research. Now this doesn't mean you're just going to show me what you collected. Instead, with your collection of inspirational and useful video and audio content, which you have on your computer now, which you collected last time around, you're going to present a mood board of types to explain your choices. So you're going to go through the stuff you collected and you're going to curate it. You're going to pick out the photos, the images, the sounds, the music that you feel are going to work best for what your idea for your title sequence is going to be, right? And by now, of course, you should start conceptualizing what your title sequence is going to look like. If you're turning your classic movie or TV show into, say, a horror movie, well, what does that look like? What are the sounds you're going to use? What kind of mood are you going to evoke? What colors are we going to see? So start choosing and curating your images and your sounds that sort of move you in that direction, right? Now, you're going to make this mood board using either PowerPoint or Google Slides or Apple Keynote, whatever you would like, whatever presentation tool you would like. You could also use Microsoft Sway or some other presentation tool that you might prefer, but any of those will work. And you're going to remind us which classic movie or TV show did you choose, which new genre and subgenre did you reimagine it as, and then you're going to answer these questions, right? What are the themes of your newly imagined movie or TV show? If you don't remember what themes are, go back to the very beginning of the semester. We talked about what themes are. How do your image choices support your genre and subgenre? So whether you chose photographs or illustrations or video clips or whatever you are using for your imagery, how do those support what your new genre and subgenre are? If your genre and subgenre is horror, for example, just to stick with that example, and all the photographs you picked are sort of bright and sunny and happy, well, that's a disconnect. They don't support it. So maybe we need to make sure that what we're choosing makes sense for the genre and subgenre we're working on. If you plan to use audio, what do you hope your audio choices will accomplish? Are you trying to make people feel scared? Are you trying to make them feel happy? Are you trying to add some suspense to your title sequence? What do you hope that the audio choices will accomplish? And that can be either music or sound effects or a combination of both. Do you have any art and film styles in mind when you're thinking about your title sequence? Now, we talked about artistic interpretation a few weeks ago, so maybe you're going to try to make it look like a watercolor painting, or maybe you're going to try to make it look like an Alfred Hitchcock movie, or something like that. Are you inspired by other types of filmmaking or art styles, and is that going to be something you're going to strive for in making your title sequence? And of course, anything else you would like to tell us. We normally would present these in class, but we're not going to be doing that, so you can skip over the "you have 5 minutes to present" part here. But you do need to upload your presentation to Canvas prior to the due date. And again, make sure that you are uploading either complete PowerPoint and Keynote presentations, but if you're doing Google Slides or Microsoft Sway or some other presentation software, just simply upload a link. This here, of course, is an example of sort of a traditional mood board, but you can make it pretty much any way you want. If you're unclear what a mood board is, go do some research on it so that you get the idea before you start building your presentation of research. Okay, so that is due at the end of this week, end of the day Friday, so be sure to be working on that. And then lastly, we are going to dive into a conversation about logos and branding marks. So let's go do that now. With sort of logos and branding marks, because they eventually end up into sort of branding identity systems. So whether it be sort of a stationary system, you know, everything from letterhead to envelopes to business cards to other deliverables like mugs and buttons and whatnot, you know, you take the idea of a logo and you sort of explode it outwards and use the various component parts, the typography, the shapes, the color palettes, and you apply that across a variety of deliverables. Now, this is sort of a traditional print set of items, and here's another one. These are just samples. You can see that they don't really, these are not real for real companies, but you get the idea. But of course, they can be applied even more whimsically. Now, again, these are print deliverables for this particular logo brand, and this is obviously a little more upbeat and fun. And again, printed things like stationery, but also things like folders and advertisement and buttons and all sorts of things. This is a sort of recent rebrand design from Mount Sinai Hospital. They not only redesigned their logo, which you can see here, but then they put a lot of work into how to deconstruct that and reapply it to a variety of deliverables. Now, the ones we just sort of looked through quickly, those are sort of traditional print ones, and they do have some print items here, like folders and bags and whatnot. But they also have mobile applications, as seen here on this tablet, and their website, as well as their mobile website, the responsive site for their website, as seen here on a mobile phone. So the idea of a logo isn't just let's create an interesting logo that's easy to sort of recognize and understand, but we need to have a visual vocabulary that we can deconstruct and apply to a variety of different places. And it starts out with the logo design. It starts out with that simple graphic and typographic treatment that has a lot in common with the pictograms that we looked at before, but really must tell a much larger story. Now, we talked about, in the first week, we looked at sort of the idea of deconstructing an apple down to a really simple black and white pictogram of an apple. But then we looked at the Apple logo in black and white and said that while that visually is very similar to a pictogram, it tells a much bigger story because it's about the brand of Apple Computer. Same thing here. This graphic that they came up with for Mount Sinai, sure, it speaks to the name, Mount, as in mountain, Sinai, and it's a really simple graphic. It shows interconnectivity. It has a nice color palette and all that. But unto itself, you might say, well, that's an interesting pictogram or an interesting graphic, but it tells a much larger story because of what Mount Sinai is, if you're familiar with the hospital and all the services that it offers and all the specialties, as well as its reputation and its history. The story that this logo tells gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And that says nothing of the fact that it has to be applied to all these deliverables and many more. I'm sure if you visit the hospital, you'll see variations on this logo and identity system in all of the signage and wayfinding systems. So it's everywhere. This here is an example of sort of a identity system style guide where we have the logo design here, which employs a graphic, some nice typography, but then we get into sort of the settled upon color palette with all the coding information about how to create those colors, whether it be CMYK or RGB. We have the primary typefaces, the font choices, and the different ways in which they can be used. Some examples of how to use the logo or how not to use the logo, or how the typeface is employed. An example of it applied to different deliverables, both in print and digital environments. Some close-ups of some of those deliverables, and so on and so forth, as well as a 3D version of the logo. So the application of logos really goes way beyond it just being a simple pictogram or graphic, and really starts to tell a much larger story. But, like I said, they are related to pictograms and graphics, and so as a result, you want to start out with various iterations. So this here is 3 sheets showing somebody's thumbnail sketches for a logo idea that is based on a bumblebee, right? And so if somebody said to you, design me a logo based on a bumblebee, you would want to go through a variety of different deconstructive iterations of what you imagine as a bumblebee. And so here on page 1, you can see they started out with some simple pencil sketches, sort of little graphical or cartoon versions of bumblebees, and then introducing some color using some simple shapes and lines and smudges and whatnot. And then getting into some more abstract representations of bumblebees, like these that are just made up of lines. Something a little more whimsical, where the wings become a heart. Then getting into the letter B, because it's a bumblebee, and using some of those. Even more abstract representations. Now you're doing sort of like visual word association, where you're bringing in elements that are related to bumblebees, such as kind of this blob of honey, this hexagram shape, which of course is, you know, part of the honeycomb shape that we see in hives. These sort of stripes that imply motion but use the bee colors, more honeycombs, etc., etc. A variety of different sort of options. Now, when you're thumbnailing, and you've probably had to do this for other projects, the idea is to wring out as many visual ideas out of your head as you possibly can in a very short amount of time. These are done quickly using simple tools, markers, pens, pencils, that's it. You can do a little bit of digital too, but usually analog art tools are best. This doesn't mean that they're all great ideas. You're just trying to get out all the ideas, right? And really do some deconstruction of the visual. So, you know, these happy face ideas maybe are not the best ideas, but they're getting them out. Here we've got some more using some pen and ink. Everything from drops of honey to various abstract shapes, playing around with cross-hatching, the shape of the bees, and so on and so forth. The path in which bees fly. Bees don't normally fly in a straight line, so they're sort of playing around with that concept. And then the last page, they started introducing some digital ideas, although you can see they go back to some pen in a second. You know, the double bees, a couple of different bees, more graphical interpretations of bees, a 3-dimensional bee, and so on and so on and so on. Somewhere in this 3 pages of sort of deconstructing the concept of a bumblebee into a graphic of a bumblebee, you've got some good ideas that you can run with. And if I told you to pick out your 2 or 3 favorites from these and then go develop them further, you could do that. Now, again, this is not a branding and identity class, but I did want to point out that this is sort of the next logical step from pictograms as a communication device to logos as a branding foundational tool. So this handout here goes over some ideation techniques that I happen to like. Now, of course, everybody has their own. There's a ton of good ones, but you can read through this one and play around with some ideas. We have one-a-days, mind maps, the dump and clump technique, the soak, wash, rinse, and spin technique, thumbnail iterations, which we were just looking at examples of those with the bumblebees, and abstraction. These are all sort of techniques that help you sort of get visual ideas out of your head and onto paper or onto a screen. Allows you to sort of brainstorm. One-a-days, as you probably know, is the idea of taking a simple theme or prompt and doing it every single day for a period of time. So it could be for a week, could be for a month, could be for a whole year. This is done a lot in photography, but also in drawing, as well as other areas of art and design. So one-a-days are a good way to sort of just keep doing the same thing over and over again in very small amounts until you get some really interesting results. Mind maps you might be familiar with. Here's an example of some mind maps, which mind maps are just basically visual word association. So it helps to do this with a team of people. You write down your basic idea and then you make a connection to it and you write down the first word or draw a picture of whatever comes to mind immediately. And then you branch out from there. And before you know it, you have a whole board or wall full of ideas. This one's more about drawing and some basic words. This one's done digitally using a tool called Coggle. But either way, mind mapping is a good way to sort of dump out all the ideas that spring to your brain immediately. Speaking of dumping, dump and clump is a really interesting technique using Post-it notes. It allows you to try to answer some basic questions, jot down your ideas really fast, and then group together your Post-it notes by related concepts. So that's something to sort of play around with too. Perhaps you're familiar with that. Soak, wash, rinse, and spin is a little more of a complex way of working, but I broke it down into these sort of basic areas here. You know, research, which is to intake as much information as you can. Collaboration, to collaborate with either team members or clients or other people invested in it. To do visual exploration, which includes using workbooks and refining your ideas, examining multiple options, and then looking at environmental influences, sort of the consideration of the ultimate purpose of the solution. This is based on a book of the same name. It's actually a really interesting technique. Then thumbnail iterations. We just looked at some thumbnails of bumblebees, but as you're probably familiar with, thumbnails are really a good way to get down quick ideas fast. They're not all supposed to be wonderful. In fact, you might not even understand half of them, but it's just to get the ideas out. And then, of course, once you've got your thumbnails, you can do some abstraction. Take something that's common, like in this case, a graphic of a compass, and break it down into simpler and simpler forms until you get something new. So that's abstraction. So anyway, these are just ideation techniques that you can play around with. Perhaps you have your own brainstorming techniques that you like to use. I always have students say they listen to music, they go for a walk, they ride their bike, they do a bunch of different things. So whatever works for you to sort of help you come up with good ideas. Now, this handout I use in a few different classes. It's not really specific just to this class, but seeing as we're getting into some more complex projects here, I think it's a good idea to really make sure that you have a system for brainstorming that sort of works for you. Okay, these examples here I forgot to show you when we were looking at logo ideas and design. We were talking about abstraction and pictograms. This is a set of 50 abstractions and pictograms that were used for logo exploration for a client that I had a bunch of years ago. It's a building cleaning company, you know, the people that go into buildings with those big jumpsuits to do sort of heavy-duty cleaning. I was hired to design a logo and do a branding system for them, and sort of did a whole bunch of simple black and white abstractions of pretty much cleaning tools, cleaning concepts, etc. And I just sort of wanted to scroll through this to show you that you can really, beyond thumbnails, really wring out ideas even further in this very stark sort of black and white context. Then I start to add some grays and some typography as we go along here to really kind of combine ideas and play with it. A lot of negative and positive space, everything from graphical representations to more cartoony representations, completely abstract geometric representations, and so on and so forth. So our ability as humans to really recognize simple shapes and symbols goes a long way in sort of you being able to try out a variety of different, logo ideas if you're doing this sort of thing. Anyway, just something to be familiar with and to pay attention to in terms of our ability to visually understand sort of graphics and clues and logos and whatnot. Okay,